Merry Christmas, Mia. Drink your cider. My stepmother set the copper mug in front of me with both hands, smiling the way she always smiled, teeth first, eyes dead. She did not know I had spent the last 72 hours watching her through a camera hidden inside a smoke detector I installed in the kitchen 3 days ago. She did not know I had footage of her crushing my father's warfarin tablets into a fine white powder at 2 in the morning, testing the dose on a raw steak to make sure it dissolved without a trace. She needed me hospitalized before midnight on January 2nd. That was the day my biological mother's trust matured. $1.8 million, payable only to me, unless I was declared medically incapacitated. Then it defaulted to my legal guardian, my father, her husband, her wallet. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I wrapped my fingers around the warm mug, brought it close to my face, and inhaled the cinnamon. Then I looked across the table at my stepsister, Brooke, who was already staring at my drink the way she stared at everything I had with hunger disguised as boredom. I smiled and raised the mug. Wow, Victoria, you actually made the bourbon recipe this year. Before I tell you who ended up drinking from that mug and what I had hidden in my coat pocket the entire night, I want you to do something for me. Drop a comment and tell me the worst thing a family member has done to you at a holiday dinner. I want to hear the stories nobody tells at the table, because this one almost killed someone. You probably want to know why I was still sitting at that table. Why I had not packed a bag and disappeared the moment I found out? The answer is not complicated. I loved my father. Or I loved the man he used to be, before Victoria turned him into a ghost who signed whatever she put in front of him. My mother died when I was 11, ovarian cancer, fast and merciless. She left behind a small pharmacy she had built from nothing, a house with a paid-off mortgage, and a trust fund she set up the week after her diagnosis. The trust was structured with a specific condition. It matured on my 30th birthday. Until then, no one could touch it. Not me, not my father, not God himself. My mother knew what grief does to money. She built a wall around it and set a timer. My father remarried 3 years later. Victoria had a daughter from her first marriage, Brooke, 1 year younger than me, with a smile that could charm a traffic cop and a personality that could curdle milk. Victoria moved in, and the temperature of the house changed overnight. Suddenly, the pharmacy my mother built was too much work and my father sold it. The savings account my mother left drained in 18 months. Ski trips, a boat nobody used. A kitchen renovation that turned into a bathroom renovation that turned into a driveway that needed heated pavers because Victoria's feet got cold walking to the car in December. I was the one who kept the lights on. I worked at the hospital pharmacy 6 days a week. I paid the property taxes when my father forgot. I covered Brooke's car insurance after her third fender bender because Victoria said it was the sisterly thing to do. I was not a daughter. I was an infrastructure. Brooke was the chandelier. She did not work. She did not cook. She occupied space beautifully and expensively, and everyone in the house orbited around her comfort. Victoria had trained my father to treat Brooke like porcelain and me like plumbing invisible until something breaks. I accepted it for years because I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that when the trust matured, I would take the money, buy my own place, and build the distance my mother never got the chance to build for me. I just had to survive until January 2nd. I almost made it. 3 weeks before Christmas, I came home early from a shift. The pharmacy had closed for a pipe burst, and I walked in the back door without texting first, which was apparently a crime in Victoria's house. She was sitting at the kitchen island with a man I had never seen before. He wore a gray suit, no tie, and had a leather folder open between them. Victoria's face when she saw me was the face of someone caught mid-surgery, frozen, gloved, unable to hide the incision. "Who's this?" I asked. "Financial advisor," she said smoothly, "for your father's retirement planning." The man smiled, collected his papers, and left through the front door without introducing himself. I let it go, but I did not forget his face. That night, I searched Victoria's desk while she was at her book club. I found a folder labeled M. Chen Trust Options. Inside was a printout from a legal database explaining the incapacitation clause of my mother's trust. Someone had highlighted the key passage in yellow and written in the margin, in Victoria's handwriting, "Doctor's letter needed. 30, day window." I read it 3 times. The clause stated that if I was medically declared unable to manage my own affairs within 30 days of the trust's maturity date, the funds would be redirected to my father as my next of kin and legal guardian. The next page was a draft letter, unsigned, addressed to a Dr. Abrams I had never heard of. It described me as suffering from a severe neurological episode and recommended temporary conservatorship. My hands did not shake. My vision did not blur. Something much worse happened. I felt nothing. There is a specific kind of calm that arrives when you realize the people who are supposed to protect you are drawing blueprints for your destruction. It is not peace. It is the body preparing for war. I put everything back exactly where I found it. I drove to a hardware store 2 towns over and bought a smoke detector with a built-in camera, wireless, night vision, 30-day battery. I installed it in the kitchen at 4 in the morning while everyone slept, right above the stove, replacing the old one that had been chirping for weeks anyway. Nobody noticed because nobody in that house ever looked up unless the ceiling was leaking. For 2 weeks, I watched. I watched through the app on my phone during my breaks at work. Most of the footage was boring. Victoria making smoothies, Brooke eating cereal at noon, my father wandering in for coffee, looking like a man who had misplaced the last decade of his life. Then, on December 22nd, at 1:47 in the morning, the motion sensor pinged my phone. I opened the app and saw Victoria standing at the kitchen counter in her robe. She had a prescription bottle in one hand, my father's warfarin, the blood thinner he took daily for his heart. She shook out a handful of tablets. Not 2, not 5, at least a dozen. She dropped them into a ceramic mortar and began grinding. The sound was soft, rhythmic, almost meditative, like she was making pesto for a dinner party. I recognized the dosage immediately. I am a pharmacist. I calculate this for a living. At the concentration she was preparing, it would not kill me. Not right away, but it would cause severe internal bleeding, confusion, and collapse within hours. Just enough to land me in the ICU. Just enough to get a doctor to question my mental fitness. Just enough to trigger the incapacitation clause before January 2nd. She was not trying to murder me. She was trying to break me just enough to steal everything my mother left behind. I watched her pour the powder into a small jar, seal it, and hide it behind the baking soda in the pantry. She rinsed the mortar. She wiped the counter. She went back to bed beside my father. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot and stared at the screen for a long time. I could have gone to the police that night, but I had worked in hospitals long enough to know what happens when you bring accusations without proof of intent. She would say she was crushing tablets for my father's pill organizer. The powder in the jar would be a mistake. The legal documents would be research. Without the act itself, without her putting it in my food or drink, I had a woman grinding her husband's medication at an odd hour. Suspicious, but not criminal. I needed her to commit. I needed the handoff. Christmas Eve arrived like a loaded gun wrapped in tinsel. Victoria had been planning the dinner for weeks, which was unusual because Victoria's idea of cooking was ordering from the Italian place downtown and transferring it to her own dishes. But this year, she insisted on making everything herself. Mulled cider, roasted duck, a sweet potato casserole she claimed was her grandmother's recipe. She wanted the evening to feel special. She wanted everyone at the table by 7. I arrived at 6:30. I checked the smoke detector feed one last time. Sure enough, at 5:15 that afternoon, Victoria had taken the jar from behind the baking soda, stirred the powder into a batch of mulled cider, and poured one specific mug, the copper one with the dented handle, the one that had always been mine at holiday dinners, and set it aside on the counter. She filled the other mugs from a separate pot. Clean cider for the family. Warfarin cider for me. I saved the footage. I backed it up to the cloud and to a USB drive I had tucked into my coat pocket. Then I walked through the front door, hugged my father, complimented Victoria's wreaths, and sat down at my assigned seat. The copper mug was already waiting. My father sat at the head of the table. He looked tired, the kind of tired that lives in your bones. He was not in on the plan, I was almost certain of that. Victoria had always kept him on a need-to-know basis, and what he needed to know was usually limited to sign here and don't ask questions. He was not evil, he was just empty, hollowed out by grief, then filled with someone else's agenda. I still loved him for who he was before, even if that man was becoming harder to find. Victoria sat to his right, glowing with holiday hostess energy, pouring wine, straightening napkins, performing warmth like a woman auditioning for a Hallmark movie. Brooke sat across from me, already on her second glass of Pinot Grigio, scrolling through her phone with one hand and picking at the appetizers with the other. "Mia, drink your cider before it gets cold," Victoria said again, nodding toward the copper mug. "I made it with the good bourbon this year. Just for you." I picked up the mug. I noticed my father glance at Victoria. A quick look, barely a flicker. But I caught it. He knew something. Maybe not the details. Maybe not the warfarin. But he knew enough to look away. That glance was his signature on whatever was about to happen. Silent, cowardly, devastating. I held the mug under my nose and let the steam curl around my face. Oh my God, Victoria! Is this the small batch stuff from that distillery in Kentucky? I closed my eyes and made a sound like I was tasting heaven. This is incredible. This has to be the $40 bottle. Brooke's head snapped up from her phone. Victoria's smile tightened. It's just cider, Mia. No way. I swirled the mug gently. I can smell the vanilla and the oak char. This is the Woodford Reserve batch. I've been wanting to try this for months. Brooke set her wine glass down. Her eyes locked on my copper mug like a missile acquiring a target. Why does she get the good stuff? It's nothing special, Victoria said quickly. I just thought Mia could use something warm after her long shifts. I almost laughed. Victoria had never once acknowledged my work schedule. She had never made me a drink, offered me a snack, or asked how my day went. The lie was so transparent it practically came with a window. Since when do you make special drinks for Mia? Brooke's voice had an edge to it now. Not curiosity. Territorial instinct. It's my mug, I said, pulling it closer to my chest. Victoria made it for me. Get your own. That was the trigger. Years of conditioning had taught Brooke one rule. If Mia has it, it should be mine. If Mia values it, it must be valuable. I had spent my entire life on the losing end of that equation. Tonight, for the first and last time, I used it. Let me try it, Brooke said, reaching across the table. No, I pulled the mug back. You have wine. This is mine. Don't be selfish, Mia. Brooke stood up, leaning over the centerpiece. Victoria's face lost its color. Brooke, sit down. There's more cider in the kitchen. I'll pour you a fresh. I want that one. Brooke pointed at my mug. She's being dramatic. It's just a drink. Brooke, please. Victoria's voice cracked. She turned to my father with desperate eyes. Richard, tell her to sit down. My father looked at Victoria. He looked at Brooke. He looked at me. Then he looked at the mug. I watched the calculation happen. Whatever Victoria had told him, whatever version of the plan he had been briefed on, he understood that the cider was meant for me and only for me. He understood that if he stopped Brooke, I might get suspicious. I might not drink it. And then whatever Victoria had promised him, whatever financial rescue she had dangled, would evaporate. He cleared his throat. Mia, just let your sister have a sip. It's Christmas. Victoria made a sound. A small, broken exhale, like the last bit of air leaving a balloon. She stared at her husband and saw, maybe for the first time, that his loyalty had no floor. He would let his stepdaughter drink whatever was in that mug as long as the plan stayed on track. Because to him, the plan was all that mattered. Not Brooke, not me, the money. I loosened my grip on the mug. I did not push it toward her. I did not pour it for her. I simply stopped holding on. Fine, I said. If you want it that bad? Brooke snatched the mug with a triumphant grin. She held it up like a trophy, looked me dead in the eyes, and took a long, deep swallow. Victoria lunged across the table. Her hands shot toward the mug, fingers clawing at the copper handle. But my father's arm was already there, blocking her path. He did not grab her. He just placed his forearm on the table like a barricade, firm and deliberate. Victoria's hand hit his arm and stopped. She looked at him. He looked at the tablecloth. He did not meet her eyes. He did not need to. The message was clear. Let it happen. Brooke drank half the mug in 3 gulps and set it down with a satisfied thud. I picked up my fork and began eating. The next 14 minutes were the longest of my life. I counted every one of them because I knew exactly how long warfarin at that concentration takes to produce symptoms. Confusion first. Then nausea. Then the bleeding begins internally, invisibly, dangerously. At minute 9, Brooke rubbed her eyes. Is it hot in here? At minute 11, she pushed her plate away. I feel weird. At minute 13, she stood up, swayed, and grabbed the back of her chair. A thin line of blood appeared at her left nostril. Mom? Her voice was small, not bratty, not entitled, just scared. Victoria screamed. She knocked her chair backward and ran to Brooke's side. Baby, sit down. Richard, call 911. My father fumbled for his phone, his hands trembling so badly he dropped it twice. When he finally got the operator, he said exactly what I expected him to say. My daughter is sick. She might have eaten something bad. Food poisoning, I think. I stood up. That's not what happened, and you know it. The room went silent except for Brooke's shallow, confused breathing. Victoria was kneeling beside her, pressing a napkin to Brooke's nose. tears streaming down her face. "If they treat this as food poisoning," I said, my voice flat and controlled, "they'll run the wrong panels. They'll waste hours. Warfarin toxicity requires specific intervention. Vitamin K, possibly plasma transfusion. Every minute they spend guessing is a minute Brooke doesn't have." Victoria's head snapped up. "How do you—" I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the app, and held the screen 6 inches from Victoria's face. The footage played in high definition. Her, at the counter. The bottle. The mortar. The grinding. The pouring. My father's face visible in the background, looking away with practiced precision. "I'm a pharmacist, Victoria. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize the smell of crushed warfarin in a cider? I've been watching you for 3 weeks." Victoria's mouth opened, but nothing came out. My father went white. Paper white. Ghost white. The kind of white that comes when a man realizes his silence has been recorded. "Here are your options," I said. I spoke calmly because calm is the most terrifying thing you can be in a room full of people who are falling apart. Option 1. You keep lying to the paramedics. Brooke gets worse, maybe permanently. And I hand this footage to the police along with the legal documents I found in your desk about my mother's trust and the incapacitation clause you've been researching. That's premeditation. That's attempted assault with intent to defraud. That's federal because the trust crosses state lines. I let that sink in for exactly 2 seconds. Option 2. You tell the truth right now. The paramedics treat Brooke correctly. She recovers. And you deal with the consequences of what you actually did instead of the consequences of what happens when you let your daughter bleed out on Christmas Eve to protect a lie. Sirens. Faint at first, then growing, filling the street with red and blue light through the dining room windows. Victoria looked at Brooke. Brooke was leaning against the wall now, her eyes glazed, her breathing rapid and shallow, the napkin at her nose soaked through. Whatever Victoria had built, the schemes, the forged documents, the stolen retirement, the slow dismantling of my mother's legacy, it all telescoped down to this single image. Her daughter, bleeding, confused, slipping. It was medication, Victoria choked out. Blood thinners. In the cider. It was in the copper mug. Please help her. The front door burst open. Paramedics filled the room with equipment and urgency. I stepped back and gave them space. I told the first EMT exactly what had been ingested, the approximate dosage, and the time of consumption. He looked at me like I had just handed him a roadmap. They started treatment immediately. Then I turned to the officer standing by the door, his hand resting on his belt, his eyes scanning the room with the practiced calm of a man who had walked into worse. I placed the USB drive in his hand. The footage shows preparation and intent. You will also want to look into a Dr. Abrams and a draft conservatorship letter in the desk upstairs, second drawer. He looked at the drive. He looked at my father, who was sitting in his chair, staring at nothing, a man watching his life collapse in slow motion. He looked at Victoria, crumpled on the floor beside her daughter, mascara streaking her face. They left in handcuffs 20 minutes later. My father did not resist. He did not speak. He walked to the squad car like a man who had been rehearsing this walk in his nightmares for years. Victoria screamed the entire way down the driveway. She screamed Brooke's name. She screamed that it was a misunderstanding. She screamed that I had planned the whole thing. The officer closed the door, and her voice became a muffled vibration behind glass. Brooke survived. The ER team administered vitamin K within the golden window. She spent 4 days in the hospital, most of it sleeping, some of it crying. I visited once. I brought her a smoothie from the place she liked downtown. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew what was in that mug." "Yes. And you let me take it." I sat down in the chair beside her bed. "I pulled the mug away from you 3 times, Brooke. I told you no. I told you it was mine. I told you to get your own. You took it because you have spent your entire life taking things from me and nobody ever taught you to stop. I didn't hand you that mug. You grabbed it." She was quiet for a long time. "But you also called 911 before you even walked through the door that night," she said. "The paramedics told me. They said someone had called in a potential poisoning 40 minutes before dinner. They were already staged 2 blocks away. I didn't say anything. You were never going to let me die," she whispered. "No," I said. "I was never going to let anyone die. But I needed them to show who they really were. And I needed you to see it." Brooke testified at the preliminary hearing. She told the court about the mug, about Victoria's lunge, about my father's arm blocking her. She described the exact moment she realized her own mother had chosen self-preservation over her daughter's life. It was the first time Brooke had ever told the truth about our family in a room full of strangers. It was the first time she had ever done something brave. The charges were severe. Victoria faced attempted aggravated assault, fraud, and conspiracy. My father was charged as an accessory. The prosecutor argued, and the judge agreed, that a man who blocks his wife from saving his stepdaughter is not a bystander. He is a participant. His silence was not neutrality, it was a choice. My mother's trust matured on January 2nd, as scheduled. $1.8 million transferred to my account without incident. I used a portion to pay off the mortgage on the house, then I sold it. I did not want to live inside a building that held that much silence. I moved to Portland. I found a pharmacy that let me work 4 days a week. I adopted a dog, a 3-legged rescue named Clover, who is afraid of vacuum cleaners and loves peanut butter more than dignity. On quiet mornings, I sit on my porch with coffee and I think about my mother. I think about the trust she built. Not just the financial one, the other one. The trust that said, my daughter is strong enough to outlast whatever comes after me. I was. Brooke and I text sometimes. Not often, not deeply. She sent me a photo last week of an apartment she signed a lease on. First place she ever paid for herself. She's working at a boutique in the city. It's not glamorous, but it's hers. I sent back a thumbs up and a picture of Clover wearing a bandana. We are not close. We may never be. But we are honest with each other now. And that is more than we ever had at that dinner table. People say blood is thicker than water. But I have cleaned up enough blood to know that thickness does not equal warmth. Some families are held together by love. Some are held together by leverage. And the moment you stop being useful to the second kind, they will find a way to recycle you into something they can spend. My mother knew that. She built the wall, she set the timer, and she trusted me to still be standing when it went off. So let me ask you this. If you were sitting at that table, holding a mug you knew was poisoned, watching someone reach for it, someone who had spent years making your life smaller, would you have knocked it out of their hand? Or would you have let them take the sip they'd been reaching for their whole life? Tell me in the comments. And if this story made you feel something, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Subscribe to Karma's Whirl because the next story is even wilder. Like this video if you believe that karma does not forget. It just waits for the right dinner.